Welcome back to AzureTracks, and I'm Andrew Lowe's. With me today, I've got the wonderful and beautiful Ryan McKay. Thank you so much for joining me again, sir.
Hey, that's awesome to be here again. Thanks, Andrew.
Wonderful. So today we have a little bit of a treat with Azure AD Connect, kind of the revisit. Now we did kind of a bit of a deep dive series on this, let's say a little while ago. But we've been chatting about it a lot lately. We've had a few projects we've been working on together and kind of individually where we've had to do some work, some upgrades, some changes, different things. And we thought, you know what? We haven't done a video on AD Connect, or Azure AD Connect, I should say, V2. It's bigger, it's better, it's louder, it does a little bit more, it's more cloud native oriented, and there's a lot of benefit to it. So let's roll the clip here, and then we'll come back and let's have a little chat about Azure AD Connect together. And we're back. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. So Ryan,
Hey,
what have we been doing with all this Azure AD Connect stuff anyways?
well, as you're aware, Andrew, Azure AD Connect is sort of that gateway connecting your on-premises Windows Active Directory, or as we call it around these parts, Windows Active Directory, to your Azure Active Directory, which is what enables our clients, our users, to consume the wonderful services that Azure Active Directory offers, including my personal favorite, the M365 stack.
Absolutely right. So there's so many different pieces of it, and today we're just going to kind of focus in a little bit. So I guess maybe let's just take a quick peek at some of the stuff that we're going to chat about here. So if we take a look at our browser here, we can see, first of all, we need to download it. Now, this may or may not be true if you're going to set up net new, but if you don't have, for example, Server 2016, if you're running version 1X, whatever, on 2012 R2 or 2012, for example, you will need to we'd recommend. It's funny because I wanted to bridge this one carefully. Don't upgrade your servers, build new. I'm not a fan of in-place upgrades with server operating systems. Stability is a little bit better. We're not going to deep dive on the in-place upgrade process today. It's so much better than it used to be. However, it takes mere minutes now to deploy a server in most environments, or if you're using them in Azure, which of course we absolutely would endorse in this case, then just literally minutes. A few clicks and away you go. You've got a 2016 server. Now you can use 2019 as well. And I'm going to kind of hold there and say I'm not ready to go to 2021 quite yet, but there's possibilities there. So there's some different things we can do with 2021, but the minimum, of course, is 2016. So if I kind of just jump over here and we take a quick look at that automatic upgrade. Now, we can enable the auto upgrade, which we should do because this enables kind of those minor incremental versions, right? But what happens if we have that old server and we're running V1X and it's downloaded version 2 for us and it's ready to go, but it hasn't auto upgraded? What's going on with that?
So version 2.0 of Azure AD Connect has a requirement for install of running Windows Server 2016 and above. Version 2 of Azure AD Connect does not allow the auto upgrade from 1.x version. So it will require manual intervention by an administrator to upgrade from the 1.x version to the 2.x version. And of course, we recommend the 2.x version because, again, bigger, stronger, faster, louder.
Exactly, right? So there's a few different things that we always like to kind of include when we're talking with a client about Azure AD Connect. There's quite a lot to cover. So we're just
Mhm.
going to stay at a bit of a higher level. I
Yeah.
think anybody who's joined us for our chats before probably knows that we'll be able to stick to that for about 2 minutes. So
Pretty.
we'll attempt to stay at a high level instead of getting into the weeds too much. But there is quite a lot of weeds, let's say, on this lawn, right?
Yeah.
So we do have to talk about some details. So when we think about how we're going to configure this, we have some kind of nifty new security features with version 2 that are very shiny and new. A great example is we can't use a global administrator account. What an awesome improvement, right?
Yeah, and that stemmed from actually a security exploit that came out, if I recall correctly, about 2 years ago, where um, you know administrators, had they used a domain admin or had they used an enterprise admin account to as a service account to run AD Connect, there was actually an exploit for that. So Microsoft, really tightened down the security in subsequent versions moving forward, and then moving to today, with the newer versions. If the service account that you're using to run AD Connect is delegated to or given the domain admin or enterprise admin role, it won't let you use it. So generally speaking, I prefer not to use service accounts anymore. I prefer to actually I prefer to allow AD Connect to create the account, because then it properly creates the permissions for that account, so that objects can be updated from AD Connect. For instance, self-service password reset, device writeback, group updates, and whatnot. That said, there are environments that through policy and process absolutely require service accounts for these things. Now, just to step this back for a second, if you use Azure AD Connect to create the account, it's creating a user account in the user's OU. It's an MSOL, a bunch of numbers, and it's pretty obvious what the account's used for, because in the description, the newer versions of AD Connect actually put a description that's about this long in there, and it tells that this account is used by this identifier on this server for this purpose. Really great. Never used to be there. So that user account that's created in your user's OU has all the permissions. It's properly labeled. You're golden. That said, there's probably still some clients out there that absolutely steadfast, you have to use a service account. It has to follow this formatting. And if that's the case, there are actually documents out there, and I shared that with you, Andrew, that tells you the permissions that you have to grant this account, and it has to, have this set of permissions in order for all the synchronizations to work. So there are options available. That said, again, my personal preference is to use or is to allow the AD Connect install to create the account for me. It's simpler. I know it's secure
Oh,
by default.
100%, right? Yeah. So, and that's fair disclosure to all of our listeners and viewers. Thank you as always for being patient. But we are fighting a few video problems tonight while we're recording. But we do, Ryan, actually have the permission summary up on the screen here. So I know that you and I are a little bit disconnected, but at least forward facing, we're well connected and integrated into the
Absolutely.
same interface here. Thank you, OBS.
Yeah,
But
just like every other IT event in this world, we're always getting caught, with I will affectionately refer to them as nargles. So, as is
exactly.
always the case, you can always count on a few nargles on any change and on any podcast, and certainly in any environment that you work in.
Right. Yes. And if you choose to record or do a live event, shame on you, because you did not invite enough nargles, and now they're going to just get the fingers into the wiring and cause some fun. But with
Absolutely.
that said, though, if we think about how we install, so we've talked about kind of the permissions and how that plays out kind of internally. And I actually agree. I really do support allowing AD Connect to create those user accounts. The reason that it can do that is because when we install it, we need to use Enterprise Admin.
Yep.
So much the same as when we do Enterprise ADDS, or Active Directory Domain Services. We also call it Windows Server Active Directory, because we try to kind of simplify the communication and make a difference between on-premises and cloud. That said, when we install using Enterprise Admin, that enables the installer to execute at the level that it needs inside your forest. If we run it using, for example, domain admin, we will have problems. It's actually a common error, and it's really super easy to fix. The new version 2, and right now on the podcast screen, Ryan, we have the web browser up, and we talk about the permissions, but then we're going to talk a little bit about the ADSyncConfig PowerShell module. So if you want to have granular management, you are going to have to get your fingers a little bit typing and dirty on the keyboard with some PowerShell. So one of the cool things is, with version 2, Microsoft has taken all of the mystery out of it and made it way easier for administrators to do this. Now, there is a lot of content that is in the article, and with the video this week and the podcast, we're going to share those links in our comments. So we'll make sure. Well, I'll make sure that I type them up. I'll have to take responsibility for that one, and I will share them as well with you, Ryan. But we'll have that for our users and listeners that are following along. So one of the cool things that we can configure in the granular settings is password hash. Why is password hash important? Why would we want to do that?
Well, and it's interesting that password hash now is enabled by default. That is the default setting Azure AD Connect wants to use. In past versions, you had to actually check it. Now it's on by default. And if you want to enable other options for whatnot, then you click them. Password hash, simply put, it hashes the password from your on-prem environment to your Azure AD environment. So if my password is not password on-prem, my password is not password in Azure AD. So out of the box, you have that synchronization that's done, from day one. That's why it's there. It's important, and it really is kind of like the default environment, or the default configuration that most environments are going to need in order to start onboarding to Azure AD and M365 services.
Yeah, so we always kind of refer to this as enabling features, right? So, we kind of consider it a core feature or service to have things like password writeback and being able to synchronize those passwords, and password hash is a fundamental part of that technology. Absolutely. So we have to have that enabled for all the kind of bells and whistles, let's say, to work. So if we're going to do self-service password reset, or SSPR, we're also going to need password hash. So we talk about password writeback. So up on the screen here, I have the permissions and how we can set those in the PowerShell module using the permissions for password writeback. Now, this is a really critical piece, because if we don't have this enabled, we get this weird behavior, right? And we've all seen it. If you implement, I shouldn't say we've all seen it, that maybe not true. Anybody that has implemented a ton of 365 tenants has probably seen this behavior, where you change your password on premises. And let's say we set it to 12345. Then we go to self-service password reset, and we set it to 54321 as an example. Now, that doesn't translate back to on-prem. No problem, right? Wait the 30 minutes until resynchronization from on-prem back to cloud, and now your password on cloud, even though you just reset it a half an hour ago, is now 12345 because it's synchronized from on-prem. So we end up with this very confused end user that goes, well, IT help desk, I did reset my password like you asked, and I don't know what's going on, but now I can log in with my old password. And then watch everybody panic at the help desk.
Well, absolutely. And then it gets escalated up, and then, guys like you and I get the call, and, we're going down different avenues, worried about, Active Directory replication between sites, for instance, and those sorts of things. When again, all we have is a Nargle in the background that's messing around with things, right? So
Exactly.
very
One
important.
one missed checkbox during custom installation can lead to multiple migraines tomorrow.
Absolutely. And shout out to Microsoft for this, for, creating these PowerShell scripts, which weren't
Mm,
in earlier versions of Azure AD Connect. In fact,
exactly.
I can remember 2 years ago having a service account whose password changed, and it caused a whole heap of drama, and then didn't have the right permissions and this, that, and the other. And I've had to do these sort of fixes manually. Now you have a PowerShell commandlet to do all the work for you, which is incredibly convenient. And to all those up and coming cloud admins there, you're lucky.
Right? Yeah, I remember, let's say not that long ago, but maybe when Azure AD Connect was just born, um, there was some missing enhancements, we'll say. That's the maybe the best way to say it, right?
And as is the case with all cloud products, or all Microsoft products, but in particular their cloud ecosystem, it's evolving at such a rapid
Mm,
pace. I mean, imagine where we were, or consider where we were, 18 months ago before COVID and the pandemic hit, and where we are today. It's light years ahead of where we were 18 months ago. And as such, these products are continually, evolving. So again, massive props to Microsoft for including those scripts, which is going to save people so much time and save, so many headaches.
absolutely.
That said, to your point, the feature is password writeback. We want to ensure it's turned on so we can enable self-service password reset to kind of take that load off our help desk, and kind of let users reset their own passwords. But there is that kind of, caveat in the side, is that we have to make sure that if we're using an on-premises service account, that it has the proper permissions. Otherwise, it won't.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have to go chasing through Active Directory anymore and doing big stack traces and everything. And oh my
Absolutely.
gosh, yeah, it's
Again,
the things we don't have to do, I'm very grateful for now.
again, lending more credence to my point, and you agreed with me, is, if you can avoid specifying a service account, if you can get that exception in your policy, if you can get your security team to agree and understand the reasons why, then certainly let the AD Connect installer do the work for you and create that account. It's
Yeah, and I
easy.
think I would also say, just to kind of add to that a little bit, that in the Microsoft documents, that we'll share the links for again, but in those docs, they do a really great job of describing exactly what permissions are applied to
Yep.
those accounts that are auto-generated, and that's also a big improvement. So I've kind of brought back our web browser friend here one
Sure.
more time, and the last kind of point that I want to touch on that I feel kind of rounds off the conversation is, at least at our high level, Exchange hybrid deployment.
Yeah, and this one is near and dear to my heart. I spend a lot of my time, not only in the Teams application, but also in the Exchange application. And what this particular option does, and I've seen it used in most environments, but I've also seen environments where it's not used, is it allows sort of that. I don't want to use the term coexistence because it's a terrible term to use, but it allows the Exchange Online to write things back on-prem. And sort of the reason you might want it, and I'll give you an example, is say you grant permissions to a mailbox in the cloud. Well, to your point earlier, Andrew, when AD Connect runs the next time, it's going to synchronize the permissions that are stored in the on-premises Active Directory. So it will overwrite anything that you set, sort of on a cloud mailbox. And it's counterintuitive, but I have seen it, I have seen it in the wild, if you will. So that's what that feature will do is things that you make changes in Exchange Online will actually replicate back on premises because again, Exchange Hybrid is sort of, I don't want to use the word trust, but it's a trust. It's a connection between two distinct Exchange orgs. So your on-premises Exchange org is here, your cloud Exchange org is here, and they have connectors and communication paths between the two of them, but they are distinct. It's not like an Azure Active Directory trust, for instance, right?
Exactly.
So enabling that feature in Active Directory Connect is going to allow those changes that you've made, to mailboxes that are hosted in the cloud to come back on-prem, and then they kind of both work together to give you a better hybrid experience for Exchange.
Exactly. And a key piece of that recipe, not to be overlooked, is if you do Exchange Hybrid without enabling this, you will encounter Exchange write-back problems from Exchange Online to on-prem.
Absolutely.
So I know we try to always talk about things in the positive reference, but in this case, it is really worth noting, if you're doing Exchange Hybrid, make sure that this is part of your recipe and part of
Yeah.
your change plan. It's important.
And it's something that can be done ahead of time with no impact. It can be done ahead of time before you run the hybrid configuration wizard to create that Exchange hybrid environment.
And in fact, now I can't actually speak to the granularity of version 2. However, in the early days of version 1, you had to do this a minimum of 4 to 6 hours ahead of your actual hybrid deployment from Exchange,
Absolutely.
because you needed time for everything to propagate in the Active Directory tenant for on-premises.
Mm-hmm.
But you also had to allow propagation in your Azure tenant as well for Azure AD.
And you can well imagine that propagation took a little bit more time, at the beginning of the pandemic than it does today, right? So
absolutely, yeah. So yeah,
that's
they keep telling me in the last 10 months we've had 10 years of innovation, and I absolutely believe it. We've had such a rapid pace of change and updates. We'll just kind of simplify it and say, new server versions, new Azure versions. I can't wait to see what comes around the corner.
oh, absolutely.
So that's a bit of a good reminder, though. So I think, is there anything that you'd like to add, that you think is maybe a really good kind of
Yeah,
a
just
thinking point? Because I know you had something on your mind.
Yeah, just a quick, a quick point or whatnot. During the installation of AD Connect, you're given the option whether or not to install a local copy of the database or to point it to an external SQL server. Now, whenever I install Azure AD Connect in an environment, I always install two servers.
Absolutely.
I install an active server, and then I install a secondary server, which is in staging mode.
Yeah.
And the difference between the two is they both collect information from Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. They put it in the metaverse, they massage it, they shake it, they bake it. The difference with the staging server is it doesn't write it out, but it's there. It has the metaverse is there. It's got all the same details, and it's there on standby. So I would submit that putting the Azure AD Connect database on a third server, being a SQL server, is actually overcomplicating the environment. And in fact, if you're relying on that as a backup, and without that staging server, it's going to take you longer to restore to a single server than it is to just flip a staging server into production.
Agreed. So, you would also have to do in that case a SQL restore, which, although the tools these days are very easy to consume, a little bit more serious than simply doing a vanilla.
And from a SQL standpoint, again, looking at what the metaverse is storing locally, whether it's stored locally in a SQL Express database or stored on a third server in a SQL database, the information still exists, right? It still exists in your Windows Active Directory on premises. It still exists in your Azure Active Directory. It just has to do a full sync again, and it's set up and ready to go.
Exactly.
So I would submit to you that installing the database on a third server just overcomplicates an environment. And I would put more time and effort into creating that staging server or multiple staging servers, for that matter, as sort
Yeah.
of your DR, your backup plan in case anything happened to your primary.
Yeah. So I think what we see in larger scaled enterprises is we
Hmm.
actually see usually three, sometimes four.
Hmm.
So we'll see the primary server. You can only have one active
Yeah.
in that stack, let's say. And that's really critical here because it is a single point of failure.
Yeah.
Aha, but is it, right? No, not really. Because it's a bit of an offline technology when we think about it, right? So it's not live in that sense. That's where I say it's a bit of an offline. So we do the synchronization and then it's half an hour until the next one. Certainly hope that the IT team at your organization notices your server has black holed within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
If not, maybe take that up with them and just ask very gently how you can help improve. So Azure Monitor, not a subtle hint there.
No.
but the staging server, you simply go in and enable it. You run the wizard again.
Yeah.
You just say, yeah, I want to make it active. Now,
Yeah.
the one key piece I always recommend, always, 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 when you configure your active server, let it synchronize, let everything happen, make sure it's all happy. The next day, come back to your server and export the configuration. It's built into V2. So that's
Yeah.
my secret weapon there
Yeah.
because now
Those
it's a JSON file that you can just save, back up, keep it in
so
like an admin OneNote as part of the SOP.
So I will raise you your V2 and actually tell you that it occurred. That feature actually started appearing about 6 months ago in the 1.x versions, and once I saw that, I was like, "Oh, thank goodness!" Right? That's been something
Mhm.
that I've been missing. So, regardless of what version you're running, if you're current, you'll find that when you run the AD Connect program, and we'll come back to that program in a second, that you have that export capability. So, again, to be prudent, if you're patching that server, you're not using any automation or whatnot, or even just as part of like a monthly or bi-monthly routine, I would just run that export and store it somewhere in your IT, shared, just in case you have to rebuild a server from scratch. And at least that way you've got, the JSON or the XML of your configuration so you move forward. Now, the second point I was going to talk about, I'm going to wrap this up, is when you're in that Azure AD Connect program, be sure to exit it because they'll warn you right at the beginning that synchronization stop while this is running because you could be making configuration changes.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
good point. We actually run into that quite often because a lot of administrators, and myself included, I have to admit I am totally
I've
guilty of it.
done.
I
Yeah.
don't always log out of Windows properly. I close my RDP session or my Bastion session, and that's
Yeah.
it. I'm done.
Well, and to that end, it's not a matter of just clicking X or a matter of logging off. Is you have to properly exit the AD Connect program, and
You do.
it's somewhat niggling, nargling, if you will. That you have to do this. But when you understand the logic of what that program is doing, is this is the program for configurations. So when you launch it, it's saying, oh, well, I'm going to configure some stuff. So I'm not going to do any syncs until Ryan's done. When Ryan exits the program, then hey, Ryan's done doing configs. Anything new? No. Yes. Okay. Carry on. Right. So
Exactly.
those are
Yeah.
two big things. And sorry to go on a soapbox there, but it's I've done it. You've done it. Every other admin that's admin to Azure AD Connect has no doubt done it. But it's one of those things to kind of keep in the back of your head when you log on to that server that, hey, look, if I don't do this properly, I could go the whole weekend without running a synchronization, and that can generate calls to the help desk that'll scratch your head.
Absolutely right. Yeah, because then what we end up with is the synchronization becomes out of sync essentially, right? So people are updating passwords. Your team is provisioning new user accounts. Nothing's replicating into Azure AD anymore,
Absolutely.
and we have to kind of you go back to the server and you find, oh, geez, I left that open on Tuesday when I
Yeah.
was in there. And of course, on like Friday morning, you've been banging your head on the wall for a day,
Well, or
and there you go,
you're
right?
you've been provisioning new users, or you have your HRIS that's provisioning new users on premises, but they're not replicating the cloud. So you've got you could potentially have new people sitting there, twiddling their thumbs on a Monday morning because guess what? They don't have their mailbox yet because they haven't been assigned the license because they haven't been synchronized from on premises. So it's a very,
Well,
very
the other
important.
side of that too is the cloud changes aren't reflected back either. So if you're using third party integration like Workday or something like that,
Absolutely.
those Azure AD accounts that are created aren't being written back to on-prem anymore. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
really interesting. And I want to also thank you for using the proper verbiage of on-premises. I appreciate that. Anybody who's worked with me knows that that's a bee
Yeah.
in my bonnet always.
Yeah, I've only worked with you for a year and a half, and it's taken me this long to memorize it. But it's a very important differentiation in terminology to definitely use. So
It is,
thanks.
and a special shout out to Tim Warner on that one, who pointed that out in one of my early years training videos. And
Absolutely,
it would really just stuck with me. And it was about saying things properly so that we communicate well with our clients. And
absolutely.
I thought that was, it really spoke to me. But yes, now I end up with this like somebody says on premise, and it's like, well, no, you don't have servers that are an idea. You have servers on premises. Anyhow,
Absolutely.
moving on.
Yeah, step back.
So,
The
Mr.
long a
McKay,
little bit.
tell me, where can we find you out on the kind of the multiverse?
Oh, look at you using the terminology. Yeah, multiverse. I can be found basically on all the social medias at Microsoft Cloud Quick Fix. Twitter is the exception because I couldn't do an @ Microsoft Cloud Quick Fix. It's @ MSCQF. You can find me on Twitter, and again, all the other things, LinkedIn and whatnot, SoundCloud, YouTube is Microsoft Cloud Quick Fix, and yourself, Andrew.
Yes. Well, thank you. I was actually I was going to forget myself there. Yeah, you can find all of the different medias at AzureTracks. And I will make sure that we upload everything. And we are going to put together coming up this, let's say, late fall. We're going to get back and do a couple of at least small live events again. Things are coming back. It's a bit of up and down after this really difficult pandemic, but it's important that we get things back to where we had them. So we're going to come back to those small live events. Um, well, thank
There's
you
some
very
really
much.
exciting news coming. Really exciting news coming. I think in the future here from Microsoft. I'm looking forward to what they have up their sleeve for sure.
Absolutely. We're going to see some new things coming down the pipe very soon. So, as always, Ryan, it's a total pleasure. I love hearing you talk about these things so passionately. So,
Abs-
thank you for joining me for this session on Azure AD Connect version 2.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and goodbye.